On August 1st of 1966, a former Marine and also a current student at the University of Texas climbed into the school's clock tower with an evil plan. He was carrying multiple guns with him, and what he would do would shock the entire nation. This is the University of Texas Massacre. Hello, friend, and welcome to High Time Crime. My name is Joel, and on here I specialize in true crime and also being everywhere all at once. Everywhere! But anyway, today we're going over the case of Charles Whitman, a 25-year-old ex-Marine who secretly had a dark side. Charles, or Charlie Joseph Whitman, was born on June 24th of 1941 to Margaret and Charles Whitman Jr. Charlie had two brothers that were born in 1945 and 1947. From a very young age, he learned how to use guns, and you can even see him in this photo at the age of 2 with 2 bolt-action rifles. Charlie's father was a huge fan of guns, and he raised his children with them knowing how to use firearms. By the time that Charlie was 6 years old, his family had moved around 8 times, but by June of 1947, they finally settled down in Lake Worth, Florida. A few months later, in September, Charlie was put into Sacred Hearts Catholic grade school, which went up to 8th grade. He was given an IQ test during 1947, and it said that he had a 138.9, which is incredibly intelligent. One of his teachers at Sacred Hearts said that he was very capable and smart. Charlie constantly made honor roll, and from the 5th grade to the 8th grade, he apparently scored in the top 5% of students around the nation. Sometime then, Charlie began playing piano. He became pretty good at it, and at the age of 11, he joined the Boy Scouts. Originally, he joined the Cub Scouts when he was younger and became a Bear Scout, but at the age of 10, there just wasn't enough Cub Scout leaders, and so Charlie couldn't do it anymore. The next year, at the age of 12, he became an Eagle Scout, and he actually received a lot of attention because he was the youngest scout to ever obtain that position. Charlie's father, Charles, was very strict and would discipline all 3 of his boys by using his fist or a belt or even a paddle. He believed that his children were spoiled rotten. Charles was also the reason that Charlie became an Eagle Scout so young. He pushed him very hard. In June of 1955, Charlie graduated from the 8th grade, and in September, he started attending a Catholic high school, or St. Anne's High School. While there, at the age of 16, he had an appendectomy, or had his appendix removed, and a few months later, he was involved in a pretty bad motorcycle accident. Charlie had made money by working odd jobs, such as a paper boy, and by October of 1955, he finally had enough saved up and he bought a Harley Davidson. Charlie in high school was a popular guy and had many friendships. He dated a lot of girls and was a good student for the most part. He was a pitcher on the baseball team and also managed the football team. Charlie had perfect attendance during the 9th and 10th grade, but during his junior year, he missed school 26 times. 16 of those were in February of 1958 alone. The reason for this was because he had a blood clot on his private parts and had to have surgery to remove it. Charlie, during 9th and 10th grade, had a GPA of 3.3 and 3.46, but by 11th grade, his GPA dropped down to a 2.6, and by his senior year, it was a 2.5. In June of 1959, Charlie graduated and was ranked 7th out of 72 people. Originally, it seemed as if he had a plan to go to the Georgia Institute of Technology as he was accepted for enrollment, but he decided to join the Marine Corps at the age of 18 instead. The reason for this was because when Charlie was about to turn 18, he hung out with a bunch of friends and he got really drunk. Afterwards, he went back home. His father Charles got incredibly angry and then threw him into their swimming pool. Charlie almost drowned, and from this moment forward, he was done. He wanted to get out of his father's hold, and so that's his reasoning for joining. Charlie, 3 days after his 18th birthday, enlisted to the Marines on June 26th of 1959, and the only person he told was his mother. About a week and some change later, on July 6th, Charlie was officially set to become a Marine. For the next 2 years, he would be on active duty and he had to take physical and mental examinations, and there was nothing off about him yet. Charlie was good with guns and a very good shot. He scored 215 out of 215 points, giving him a sharpshooter rating. He was described as being the kind of guy you would want around you if you went into combat. Eventually, he'd go to Guantanamo Bay and be stationed there for a while. While Charlie was there, he learned about a scholarship program that helped bring the amount of scientists in the military up. Charlie applied for the scholarship on February 2nd of 1961, and he had to take a test for it. He ended up scoring very high on this test. By September of 1961, Charlie was now 20 years old, and he was awarded something called the NACEP Scholarship to the University of Texas, located in Austin, Texas. NACEP stands for Naval Enlisted Scientific Education Program, or NESEP. 2 months later, in November, Charlie had been fined $100 because he was found guilty of illegally possessing a deer that he killed. A few more months would pass, and in February of 1962, Charlie began to date a woman named Catherine Leisner, or Kathy. She was apparently charmed by Charlie and thought he was a perfect man. How they met, though, was through a guy named Francis Shuck Jr., one of Charlie's friends. Charlie said Kathy had eyes like twinkling stars, and that she was the most versatile woman he's ever known. Charlie, at this point, was attending the University of Texas, and this is where him and Kathy met. He was a dormitory counselor. A few months would go by, and on July 19th of 1962, Charlie and Kathy announced their engagement and picked August 17th of 1962 as their wedding day. Now, we'll talk about their relationship shortly, but first, Charlie was a chronic gambler. In one night, while he was playing poker with some friends, he lost $400. He then wrote a check because he didn't have any cash, and this check just so happened to be bad, and it bounced. Charlie's friend, who he owed money, approached him asking about the check, and Charlie told him that his family is loaded and that he'll get his friend the money. Charlie never gave his friend any money, and his friend just decided to let it go. But Charlie, in college, during his first semester, started to get pretty bad grades, notably failing chemistry. But when his grades started to improve a bit, he just appeared to have no motivation and didn't care much. So the Marines decided to withdraw his scholarship to college in the spring of 1963. Charlie decided to drop out of college and returned to active duty military and became stationed at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. Kathy stayed at the University of Texas to finish her degree. In November of 1963, Charlie had some big problems with the Marines. He faced court-martial, which is military court, that month because he was gambling and in the possession of a pistol that wasn't military grade. Apparently, Charlie had beaten up another Marine for not paying him $30 in debt, which 15 of that was interest for paying late. Once again, Charlie was a huge gambler. On November 27th of 1963, Charlie was found guilty of everything and sentenced to 30 days of confinement. This is being locked in a cell. and given 90 days of labor. He was also deranked as well. After this occurred, Charlie became very angry and started to hate the Marines and wanted to get out now more than ever. Charlie, with no knowledge of where to turn, decided to ask his father Charles for help. Charles then contacted a Florida senator, congressman, and also the Secretary of the Navy at the time to see if he could help Charlie get an early discharge. Charlie also started writing in a journal while he was in the Marines, and we get a decent look into his life and his depression furthering. In one entry, he wrote, "I wish so much that the Marine Corps would quit hindering my life and give me a discharge so that I could start leading a normal life. I have so much I want to accomplish. It seems I'll never get started. I hope I am able to discipline myself to keeping up with my correspondence courses. It seems like Kathy and I will never live together and have the troubles of normal people. God, I can't stand the Corps. My love for Kathy and my sense of responsibility to our unborn children is the only thing that keeps me from going berserk. At times, it seems as if I am going to explode." On December 4th of 1964, Charlie was finally honorably discharged, but he held the reserve status for the next 8 months until July 18th of 1965, when he was officially discharged completely. Now after this, Charlie went back and enrolled again into the University of Texas. By this point, he had taken a job as a bank teller, making $1.25 an hour, but in 3 months, he left. This same year, spring of 1965, Kathy also graduated from college with a Bachelor of Science degree in science education. She wanted to be a teacher, which she would become. But a year would go by, and on March 17th of 1966, Charlie tried to get his scholarship back, but the Marines denied his attempt. By this point, Charlie and his wife Kathy had moved into an apartment in Austin, Texas. Within a few weeks, Charlie had bought a dog and Kathy named it Shosi. This was really Charlie's favorite dog. Charlie was reported to have awful headaches constantly. He would sweat a lot and also was a fingernail biter. A year prior, in 1965, Charlie had become an assistant scoutmaster for the Boy Scouts, and he thought that he'd do a great job. But that was pretty much the opposite of his experience. It was said that he had no patience and would get angry at other leaders. Also, apparently, the boys would make fun of him and call him Porky because of his weight that he gained after the military. Now, Charlie really loved Kathy, and he wanted to do what he could to keep her around. He wrote a list of things to remember about her. Good points to remember with Kathy. 1. Don't nag. 2. Don't try to make your partner over. 3. Don't criticize. 4. Give honest appreciation. 5. Pay little attentions. 6. Be courteous. 7. Be gentle. Also, around 1965 to 1966, Charlie had started to severely hate his father more than ever. I read that Charlie's father, Charles, paid him about $180 to $380 a month as an allowance, even at 20 plus years old. Also, Charles, in Christmas of 1965, literally bought Charlie and Kathy new cars. They were Chevy Impalas. Charlie absolutely hated his car and called it the ugliest car ever made. Charlie and Charles' relationship was very bizarre because Charles really wanted to get along, but Charlie just didn't. Though even throughout these years, they would still go hunting together and visit gun stores and do other things. But Charlie was very much bothered by the fact that his father was very successful, and he felt like he could never live up to that sort of potential. Now, let's talk about what really started to set Charlie off. On March 2nd of 1966, Charles and Margaret Whitman, Charlie's parents, got into a huge argument, and Margaret decided that she was done. She wanted to leave her husband, and so she called Charlie and told him what was happening. Charlie's parents lived in Lake Worth, Florida, which was pretty far from Austin, Texas. Charlie then called the Lake Worth police at 9:30 p.m. and said that his parents were going to kill each other. By the time the police arrived, his parents were all right. Charlie called the police again about 2 hours later and told them his father said he was going to hurt his mother. About a day or so later, Charlie took an airplane and flew to Lake Worth. He then convinced his mother, Margaret, to move to Austin, and she kind of wanted to, so she did. Margaret the next month would get a job as a cashier and started working on April 8th of 1966. Meanwhile, Charlie's anger, anxiety, and depression really started to appear, and not only appear, but get progressively worse. He told one of his teachers that he despised his father, that he hated him, that if his father walked through the door right now, he'd kill him. His teacher said that he doesn't mean that, and Charlie said he certainly does. Within a short period after this, Charlie had another anxiety or panic attack and decided to quit school. At this time, Charlie was getting a call almost every day by his father, begging him to tell his mother to come back home to Florida. These calls would make Charlie insane, but he pretended and acted like everything was okay. He was appearing to be all right on the outside, but on the inside was something much more heinous. On March 29th of 1966, Charlie went and saw a doctor who prescribed him Valium, which can help with anxiety, but it can also cause paranoia and tendencies. Now, this doctor that Dr. Charlie saw recommended that he see a psychiatrist named Dr. Maurice Dean Heatley. Now, Dr. Heatley just so happened to write a counseling intake that I'm going to read to you now. It also helps us to get a better look at what was happening. This is a new student referred by one of the general practitioners downstairs. This massive, muscular youth seemed to be oozing with hostility as he initiated the hour with a statement that something was happening to him and he didn't seem to be himself. Past history revealed a youth who was one of two brothers that grew up in Florida, where the father was a very successful plumbing contractor without an education, but who had achieved considerable wealth. He identified his father as being brutal, domineering, and extremely demanding of the other three members of the family. The youth married 4 or 5 years ago and served a hitch in the Marines during his married life. He expressed himself as being very fond of his wife, but admitted that his tactics were similar to his father's and that he had, on 2 occasions, assaulted his wife physically. He referred to several commendable achievements during his Marine service, but also made reference to a court-martial for fighting, which resulted only to his being reduced several grades to a private. In spite of this, he received a scholarship to attend the university for 2 years and remain a Marine at the same time. He said that his wife had become more comfortable with him, and he says that she really has less fear of him now than in the past because he had made a more intense effort to avoid losing his temper with her. The real precipitating factor for this initial visit, after being on the campus for several years, seemed to stem from the separation of his parents some 30 days ago. Although there has been gross disharmony through the years, his mother summoned him to Florida to bring her to Texas, and she is now living in Austin, but not with her son and daughter-in-law. The youth says that his father has averaged calling every 48 hours for several weeks, petitioning him to persuade his mother to return to him. He alleges to have no intentions of trying to do that and retains his hostility towards his father. Although he identifies with his mother in the matter above, his real concern is with himself at the present time. He readily admits having overwhelming periods of hostility with a very minimum of provocation. Repeated inquiries attempting to analyze his exact experiences were not too successful, with the exception of his vivid reference to thinking about going up on the tower with a deer rifle and start shooting people. He recognizes, or rather feels, that he is not achieving in the work at the level of which he is capable, and this is very disconcerting to him. The youth could talk for long periods of time and develop overt hostility while talking, and then during the same narration may show signs of weeping. Observations. This youth told numerous stories of his childhood and of involvement with his father that were not repeated, and it was felt that this relationship, together with the genetic feature, is largely responsible for his present predicament. Although his father is only semi-literate, he was a perfectionist in other respects and extremely expansive. The youth has lived for the day when he could consider himself as a person capable of excelling his father in high society in general. He long ago acknowledged that he had surpassed him in educational fields, but he is seeking that status in virtually all fields of all human endeavor. He is self-centered and egocentric, and at the same time he wants to improve himself. The degenerated state of affairs with his parents, plus his repeated recent failures to achieve, have become extremely frustrating to him, which he, and his father, would express his hostility. Thus, some of the experiences noted above. No medication was given to this youth at this time, and he was told to make an appointment for the same day next week, and should he feel that he needs to talk to this therapist, he could call me at any time during the interval. M.D. Heatley. So afterwards, Dr. Heatley asked Charlie to return the next week, but Dr. Heatley never saw him again. The next time Dr. Heatley would hear of him, well, so would the rest of the country. Around this time, Charlie started to get really heavy into drugs, and specifically an amphetamine called Dexedrine, which made him not sleep, and he took Librium to go to sleep. A friend of his said he took Dexedrine like it was popcorn, or all of the time. He carried a pill bottle with him. In June of 1966, it was said that Charlie stayed awake for 5 full days because he had to take finals for college, and he then slept for 2 days and stayed awake for 5 more. Now going back 2 months, on April 5th, Charlie visited the University of Texas Clock Tower. This clock tower was a huge symbol and still is to those that have gone to or went to the college. It was built in 1937 and it's 307 feet tall. But while Charlie was there, he had looked around and realized that the tower would be a perfect place as he could see so many college students below. Going forward 3 months, on July 22nd of 1966, Charlie went to the clock tower again, but this time he was with his younger brother. Charlie's younger brother was visiting his mother in Texas with a friend. But the brothers went to the tower and nothing in particular happened. Later, during that same day, Charlie went to a blood fair and donated some blood. 2 days later, on July 24th, Charlie, his wife, his brother, and mother all had breakfast, and Charlie appeared to be okay. By the weekend, or July 29th, Charlie would have his last day of college courses, and this was also the last day he worked. Charlie's boss said that he wasn't acting suspicious or weird, that his job performance was great, and other people said that Charlie appeared to be in good spirits. Not one person suspected that anything was wrong. No one around Charlie could tell that he was about to snap. On Saturday, July 30th, a picture was taken of Charlie and his dog while they were sleeping. The next day, on Sunday, July 31st at 8:30 a.m., Charlie drove Kathy to work. She worked at a telephone store. Meanwhile, Charlie went to get some things. First, he stopped by a 7-Eleven at about 11 a.m. to get some meat and other things. After this, Charlie then went to a sports store and bought a Bowie knife and a pair of binoculars. A bit later, at 1 p.m., Charlie went and picked up Kathy, and afterwards, they saw a movie. Next, the couple went to a restaurant to meet Charlie's mother, Margaret. Once again, neither Kathy nor Margaret suspected anything of Charlie, and in fact, they had a great time. When the couple was done eating, they parted ways with Margaret and then went to meet some friends. These friends said that Charlie was very quiet and acting kind of weird. Once they were done hanging out, Charlie took Kathy back to work at 6 p.m. because she was doing some sort of split shift. Charlie arrived back home at about 6:15 p.m. and got out a typewriter to start writing some letters. This one was about his plan that he had in his mind, and he started writing at 6:45 p.m. Sunday, July 31st of 1966, 6:45 p.m. I don't quite understand what it is that compels me to type this letter. Perhaps it is to leave some vague reason for the actions I have recently performed. I don't really understand myself these days. I am supposed to be an average, reasonable, and intelligent young man. However, lately, I can't recall when it started, I have been a victim of many unusual and irrational thoughts. These thoughts constantly recur, and it requires tremendous mental effort to concentrate on useful and progressive tasks. In March, when my parents made a physical break, I noticed a great deal of stress. I consulted a Dr. Cockrum at the University Health Center and asked him to recommend someone that I could consult with about some psychiatric disorders I felt I had. I talked with a doctor once for about 2 hours and tried to convey to him my fears that I felt come overwhelming violent impulses. After one session, I never saw the doctor again, and since then I have been fighting my mental turmoil alone, and seemingly to no avail. After my death, I wished that an autopsy would be performed on me to see if there is any visible physical disorder. I have had some tremendous headaches in the past and have consumed 2 large bottles of Excedrin in the past 3 months. It was after much thought that I decided to kill my wife, Kathy, tonight after I pick her up from work at the telephone company. I love her dearly, and she has been as fine a wife to me as any man could ever hope to have. I cannot rationally pinpoint any specific reason for doing this. I don't know whether it is selfishness or if I don't want her to have to face the embarrassment my actions would surely cause her. At this time, though, the prominent reason in my mind is that I truly do not consider this world worth living in and am prepared to die, and I do not want to leave her to suffer alone in it. I intend to kill her as painlessly as possible. Similar reasons provoked me to take my mother's life also. I don't think the poor woman has ever enjoyed life as she is entitled to. She was a simple young woman who married a very possessive and dominating man. All my life as a boy until I ran away from home to join the Marine Corps. All of a sudden, there was a knock at Charlie's door. He wasn't expecting anyone, but it just so happened to be a guy named Larry and his wife Elaine. They were friends with Charlie and Kathy. They asked Charlie what he was doing, and he replied that he was writing to a friend in Washington. The couple said that Charlie was perfectly normal and seemed to be very happy. They talked about Charlie buying land and also Kathy being at work. Charlie said twice, "It's a shame that Kathy has to work all day and come home to," but he wouldn't finish what she was coming home to. About an hour after Larry and Elaine arrived to Charlie's, they left at 8:30 p.m., and they all said goodbye to each other. Larry and Elaine were a bit confused by Charlie's statements, but overall they weren't too concerned. Charlie then went to get his wife at about 9:25 p.m.-ish because Kathy was going to get off at 9:30. She was supposed to work at 8:30 a.m. the next morning. Meanwhile, Charlie's mother, Margaret, had been at work, and at 9:15 p.m., her shift ended, and then she went to a friend's house. While Margaret was there, she and her friend ate ice cream and talked. At 10:30 p.m., Margaret made a phone call to Charlie to let him know where she was, and Charlie asked her if him and Kathy could go to her apartment to cool down. The reason for this was because Margaret had air conditioning, and this particular day during this time was the highest recorded temperature of that year. But anyway, back at Charlie's home, Kathy ended up falling asleep sometime after 11 p.m. Charlie then left their house around midnight to go to his mother's apartment alone. Margaret met him in the lobby and had him meet the guard there. This guard said that nothing about Charlie was suspicious. Eventually, they went up to Margaret's apartment at about 12:20 a.m. Within literal moments of walking inside, Charlie took Margaret's life by strangling her and then hitting her in the back of the head with something heavy. It's unknown exactly what, but after Margaret was dead, he bashed her hand in to destroy her wedding ring, and then he stabbed her in the chest. When Charlie was done, he started crying very loudly to the point where two men who lived in another apartment could hear him and thought he was a child. Right after this, he cleaned off his hands and then immediately wrote a letter about what he just did at 12:30 a.m. Here's what he said. Monday, August 1st of 1966, 12:30 a.m. To whom it may concern. I have just taken my mother's life. I am very upset over having done it. However, I feel that if there is a heaven, she is definitely there now. And if there is no life after, I have relieved her of her suffering here on earth. The intense hatred I feel for my father is beyond description. My mother gave that man the 25 best years of her life, and because she finally took enough of his beatings, humiliation, and degradation and tribulations that I am sure no one but she and he will ever know, to leave him. He has chosen to treat her like a that you would bed down with, accept her favors, and then throw a pittance in return. I am truly sorry that this is the only way I could see to relieve her sufferings, but I think it was best. Let there be no doubt in your mind, I loved that woman with all my heart. If there exists a God, let him understand my actions and judge me accordingly. Charles J. Whitman. When Charlie got finished with his writing, he then placed his mother in her bed and made it look like she was asleep. Next, he wrote a note to the guard, pretending to be his mother. It said, Roy, I don't have to work today, and I was up late last night. I would like to get some rest. Please do not disturb me. Thank you, Mrs. Whitman. Charlie then left Margaret's apartment at about 1:30 a.m., but then he realized he forgot his medicine to keep him awake. So within 15 minutes at 1:45 a.m., he returned, but this time there was a different guard in the lobby. Charlie talked to this guard and told him he accidentally locked himself out of his mom's apartment and that she was sleeping. He said that he needed to fill a prescription for her, but forgot to grab the extra bottle, and so the guard checked to see if his mother actually did live there, and she did. So the guard then let Charlie into his mother's apartment, and he waited outside. Charlie then grabbed his medicine bottle and left the apartment at about 2 a.m. He arrived back to his house at about 2:15 to 2:30 a.m. and immediately went to where Kathy was sleeping. If you remember, he said that he was going to kill her peacefully. Well, he walked up to her while she was asleep and stabbed her with a knife in the chest 5 times. She died right away, and after this, Charlie washed his hands off, grabbed a pen, and finished the letter which he wrote earlier but was stopped in the middle of it. He said, Friends interrupted, 8166, Monday at 3 a.m., both dead. He continued by saying, I was witness to her being beat at least one a month. Then when she took enough, my father wanted to fight to keep her below her usual standard of living. I imagine it appears that I brutally killed both of my loved ones. I was only trying to do a quick through job. If my life insurance policy is valid, please see that all the worthless checks I wrote this weekend are made good. Please pay off all my debts. I am 25 years old and have never been financially independent. Donate the rest anonymously to a mental health foundation. Maybe further research can prevent further tragedies of this type. Charles J. Whitman. After writing this letter, he wrote 3 more letters to both of his brothers and also his father. The one to his father wasn't ever put out. One of the ones he wrote to his brother, Pat, though, said, August 1st of 1966, Monday at 3 a.m. Pat, you are so wrong about Mom. Maybe someday you will understand why she left Daddy. Pat, Mom didn't have any desire to harm Daddy whatsoever. She just wanted what she had worked for. She really needed that $40. Thanks for sending it. She'll never know about that grandmother or not. Charlie. It's not entirely documented what he's referencing here with the grandmother, but we can clearly see the mind frame that Charlie was in. Charlie then got a ton of supplies ready. We're talking gloves, food, fire starters, knives, water, etc. Charlie got ready as if he was going to war. I mean, he literally brought like 20 extra things with him, not including guns and ammo. But at about 5:45 a.m., He called Kathy's boss and told her that she wouldn't be in that day because she was sick. This was obviously done to throw everyone off about what actually happened to her. Now some time would pass and Charlie put everything into his trunk, and at about 7 a.m. he left his home. He then went to a rental company and rented a dolly to easily carry his belongings. After this, he stopped by the bank and cashed 2 checks worth $250. Charlie had brought guns with him, but he felt like he needed some more, and so around 9 a.m., he stopped by a hardware store and bought a .30 caliber carbine rifle and a bunch more ammo. Charlie told the cashier that he was taking a trip to Florida to shoot hogs. After this, Charlie went to 2 more gun shops and bought ammo and more guns, specifically a 12-gauge shotgun. While out shopping, he got reminded of his mother Margaret and realized he never made an excuse for why she couldn't work this day. So he went to his home and called his mother's boss and told them that she was sick. Then Charlie went into his garage and started to saw off the barrel of his shotgun. A mailman saw him in his garage because the door was wide open and walked over to talk to him. The mailman told him that it was illegal to do what he was doing, and Charlie said that it's his gun and he can do what he wants with it. These two talked for about 30 minutes or so, and the mailman said that Charlie was eerily calm. Now in total, Charlie brought 7 guns with him, most notably a Remington sniper rifle with a 4X scope so he could see very far. At about 11 a.m., Charlie would leave his house, and this time he'd never return because he was going to cause pure carnage. This particular day, or August 1st of 1966, was a very hot day. The temperature was in the high 90s and the sun was shining bright. When Charlie arrived to the University of Texas, he had to go through a checkpoint manned by a security guard. Charlie, from one of his classes, had been issued a card that allowed him access to transport heavy materials through the campus. Charlie showed the security guard this card and basically got through because of this. He arrived to the tower at about 11:30 a.m. and walked over to the elevator. Charlie was disguised as a janitor so that no one would question him. When Charlie got into the elevator, he tried to press buttons, but it didn't work. So he went over to an elevator attendant and asked if she could help, and she told him that the elevator was turned off. So she turned it on. Charlie said to her that she doesn't know how happy it makes him that she did that. Eventually, Charlie would make his way to the 27th floor and have to go up a few flights of stairs to get to the reception area, which was on the 28th floor. Once he arrived there, he came into contact with a woman named Edna Townsley. She was a receptionist. Right away, Charlie attacked her and hit her in the head with his gun. Edna, unfortunately, would die because of this. Then a couple that was outside on the deck named Don and Cheryl saw Charlie and made a bit of small talk with him, noticing that he has guns. Charlie would let these two live, and it's for reasons that are unknown. After this happened, Charlie encountered a family that was coming out of the deck, and he shot most of them. Then he began shooting at people 300 feet down below and some very far away. People had no idea what was happening, and chaos ensued. Everyone started running for their lives and hiding behind anything they could, not exactly knowing what was going on. People kept getting shot, and some people thought it was a prank, but it definitely wasn't. Within a few minutes, at 11:52 a.m., the police received a 911 call from a student there who said that someone was shooting people from the clock tower. By this point, police officers arrived on scene, but quickly found out that they were outgunned. They only had shotguns and revolvers, which was pretty much useless at long range. So civilians started to notice this, and they got their own rifles to shoot at Charlie and try to stop him. This definitely slowed Charlie down by a lot. It didn't exactly stop him, but it did do that. One of those civilians was named Alan Crum. a local manager at a bookstore close to the college. Allen wasn't just a manager at a bookstore, though. A few months before this, he had retired after spending over 24 years in the Air Force as a tail gunner. He lived only a couple minutes away from an Air Force base in Austin with his wife, 3 kids, and pet duck. What an awesome guy. But the reason that Allen even knew what was going on was because at about 12 p.m., he looked outside and saw a young newspaper delivery boy being dragged by other people onto the grass. Allen had initially thought that there was a fight happening, and so he stepped outside to break it up. When he got outside, he started to hear gunshots and quickly realized what was happening. Allen then went to try and find a payphone to call his wife. He found one and tried calling her, but because of what was happening, all of the lines were busy. Allen then turned around to leave, and this is when he saw a police officer by the name of Jerry Day, and Allen, being former Air Force, felt like he may be able to help. Allen and Jerry ended up coming across a public safety trooper named W.A. Cohen, and he was carrying a handgun and a .30 caliber rifle. Allen and Jerry ended up coming across a public safety trooper named W.A. Cowan, and he was carrying a handgun and a .30 caliber rifle. Allen asked if he could use the rifle, and Cowan gave it to him. These 3 men decided to make their way to the clock tower and eventually took an elevator almost to the top. Meanwhile, down at the bottom was 2 officers named Ramiro Ray Martinez and Houston McCoy. Officer Ray and Houston rode the elevator almost to the top as well. On the 27th floor, which was one below the observation deck on the 28th where Charlie was, the police found a few people hiding inside of an office. One of those people was Michael Gebauer Sr., sorry if I messed up pronunciation, who was at the clock tower with his family, specifically his wife Mary, his 16-year-old son Mark, his 19-year-old son Michael, his sister Margaret, and a family member or friend by the name of William. After Charlie had let the couple go earlier, he saw this family and tried to murder all of them. Michael Sr. told the officers that his whole family was killed, and he then tried to grab a gun from the officers, but the police stopped him and sent him down the elevator. Officer Ray decided that he was going to go up to the observation level and opened a stairway to go up. He was going to go alone. Allen then walked over to him and asked if he was going up, and Ray said that he was. Allen told him, "Well, you're not going by yourself." Officer Ray then deputized Allen and gave him the A-OK that it was fine to do that. As these 2 brave men walked up the stairs, they found Michael's deceased family members, and 2 of them were still alive but quickly bleeding out. Eventually, the men made their way to the 28th floor and found the deceased receptionist, but couldn't see Charlie just yet. The door had been propped closed by the dolly that Charlie rented, and so these 2 men opened it, and it had made a pretty loud noise, but they still stepped outside. Right behind them, Officer Day and Officer McCoy were making their way up. At this point, Allen and Officer Ray went at separate angles to try and flank Charlie, and this is when a firefight began. Officer Ray shot so many times that he ran out of bullets, but he missed every one. Charlie tried shooting back at him, but was aiming too high. Officer McCoy then flanked and came around a corner and fired the shotgun he was carrying and hit Charlie 2 times in the head. All of the officers walked over to Charlie, and just for safe measures, Officer Ray picked the shotgun up and shot Charlie 1 more time to make sure he was dead. After over an hour and some change, at 1:22 p.m., I believe, is when Charlie was officially deceased. His day of wrath was now over, and it certainly left a huge mark on everyone that was there, his victims, their families, and a whole bunch of other things. All in all, Charlie killed a total of 16 people, 2 of those being his mother and wife, and 14 of those being completely random, innocent people that he did not know. He had wounded at least 30 other people during this senseless tragedy. Charlie Whitman was secretly an evil person hiding behind a nice guy persona. Nobody, not even those closest to him, knew what he was truly capable of. As to why he did what he did, it boils down to a few reasons most likely. One of those is because of his hatred and also desire to basically get back at his father. He absolutely hated the man. Charlie wrote numerous times about how much he despised his father. Another very interesting thing to note is that an autopsy was thoroughly done on Charlie and his brain. His brain was a bit iffy because a lot of it had been destroyed, but it was found that he had a pecan-sized tumor that was pressing on his amygdala, which is the region of the brain that controls emotion and behavior. And the tumor was also pressing on his thalamus and hypothalamus. It was said that the tumor was most likely not the reason that Charlie had done what he did, but it could have been. It's truly unknown. If you remember, Charlie was also dealing with chronic headaches, and so it's quite possible that the tumor had something to do with that. But regardless, what Charlie did was one of the worst possible things he could have done. He took the lives of many people for no reason at all, and rather than being remembered as a good soldier or an intelligent man with 140 IQ, he'll be remembered as an evil presence, and that's all he'll be remembered for. For 18 years, this would be the most people killed by a single person until the San Isidro McDonald's massacre in 1984. The people that were killed in this tragedy deserve to be remembered. Dr. Robert Hamilton Boyer was 33 years old and had contributed greatly to the theory of rotating gravitating systems. He was considered to be a great listener and someone who was very honest. Dr. Boyer had only been in Texas for under 24 hours because he was going back and forth between working in Mexico and visiting friends and family in Texas. Dr. Boyer also had a wife and 2 kids who were in England. He was actually getting ready to go there before he was killed. Thomas Ashton was 22 years old and an activist for civil rights, a member of the Peace Corps, and also a college student. Thomas was supposed to leave to go to Iran for the Peace Corps on September 14th, only a month after this happened. Thomas was studying Persian and had already graduated from the University of Southern California with a degree in political science, but he wanted further education. Thomas Frederick Ekman, or Tom, was 18 years old and had an interesting early life living in Spain for 3 years as a child. He was attending the University of Texas at this time and became a member for the Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS. This group opposed racial discrimination and also the participation of the United States in the Vietnam War. While at a meeting, Thomas met a young woman named Claire Wilson. She was already 6 months pregnant when they met. Thomas adored her, and so in June of 1966, they started dating and moved in with each other. On August 1st, they attended an SDS meeting, and afterwards, they left. While walking at 11:47 a.m., Claire was all of a sudden shot in the stomach, and her baby, or baby boy Wilson, was immediately killed. She ended up surviving. After this, Thomas asked Claire what was wrong, and within a few seconds, Thomas was shot dead by Charlie. Martin, or Mark Gabor, was 16 years old, and his aunt Margaret Lamport was 56 years old. She was the sister of Michael Gabor Sr. Michael Sr. and his wife Mary, their 2 sons, 19-year-old Mike and 16-year-old Mark, and also his sister Margaret and her husband William, were on their way to Houston, Texas for a high school all-star football game when they decided to make a tour to the University of Texas Tower. When they had gotten to the 28th floor, they noticed some things were off but still tried to get to it. Charlie then ambushed them and killed Mark and Margaret and wounded Mike, the 19-year-old son, and his mother Mary, or Michael's wife. Both Mike and Mary had to play dead until the police arrived. David Hubert Gumby was 58 years old when he decided to be taken off of dialysis. In 1966, he was enrolled in the summer school at the college because he was trying to finish his degree in electrical engineering. On August 1st, he was spending most of his day at the library and decided to leave at about 11:50 a.m. Halfway to where he needed to go, he realized that he forgot a book and turned back around, and within a few moments was hit by a bullet. David had to play dead for nearly an hour after being shot, and he had to have surgery for his small intestine, and this is when the doctors noticed that he only had one kidney that was functioning, and the one that was functioning was very damaged. On November 7th of 2001, David decided he was done with dialysis, and about a week later, he passed away. Karen Griffith was 17 years old and a student at Lanier High School. She wasn't even on the college campus, but Charlie had been shooting at everyone he saw, and because he had a 4x scope, he could see her. Not too much is known about her, but she didn't die right away. In fact, she survived an entire week and one day, but she ended up dying on August 9th of 1966. Thomas Ray Carr was 24 years old, and he was a former Armyman from 1962 to 1965. He served in Taiwan for 2 years. It was originally called Formosa, and he was a member of the Methodist Church. Thomas was an honor student at Arlington State College, and he wanted to work for the United States State Department. In order to do this, he decided to get some extra credits by going to the University of Texas during the summer. On August 1st of 1966, he just completed a Spanish test and did great on it. He went to leave and was walking on the sidewalk when he saw Karen Griffith get shot. He ran over to try and help her and was immediately shot and killed himself. Claudia Marilyn Rutt was 18 years old and was the fiancée of a guy named Paul Bolton Sontag. He was also 18. On August 1st of 1966, the couple were hanging out with their friend Carla. Paul had to pick up his paycheck and Claudia needed to get a polio vaccine. When Charlie started shooting, the three friends took cover behind construction barriers in front of a dress shop. For some reason, Paul had stood up and said, "Carla, come look, I can see him. This is for real." All of a sudden, he was shot in the face. Claudia then went over to him and wouldn't step away from him, and that's when she was also shot in the chest. Her friend Carla was right behind her, holding her back, and when this happened, she also got shot in the hand. Carla survived, but unfortunately both Claudia and Paul didn't make it. Billy Paul Speed was 22 years old, and as a child he was in the Boy Scouts and eventually became an Eagle Scout. He loved to go cave exploring, and while in high school, he'd fix up cars with his brothers. Also in high school, he enjoyed photography and did this for a while. After high school, Billy joined the Army, and by 1963, he left to start a family. Billy had a wife, and they eventually had a daughter, and by this time, Billy became a police officer with the Austin Police Department. He was an officer for 13 months until August 1st of 1966, when he was eating lunch and heard shots start ringing out. Billy immediately ran to the danger, but unfortunately was shot and killed in the process. Edna Elnora Rose Townsley was 51 years old and a receptionist that was on duty. Edna was supposed to have this day off, but had been covering for someone who was on vacation. She was 5'4" and had a very loud but unique laugh, and had been working at the University of Texas since 1954. Edna had 2 children, sisters, friends, and was missed greatly. Harry Walchuk was a 38-year-old former sailor and a father of 6 children with his wife Marilyn. They met in Minnesota in 1951 and then went to Texas for Harry to get a bachelor's degree from the University of Texas in 1954. Within 12 years, in 1966, they'd go back so Harry could finish a PhD at the university. On August 1st, he was doing research at the library, and at about 12 p.m., he left to go get something to eat. As he was walking, he was unfortunately shot in the chest. Kathy Frances Leisner Whitman was 23 years old when she was murdered by her husband, Charlie, at their home. She was a very smart woman who had a phenomenal personality. She had many great accolades growing up, including being crowned queen at the Needville Youth Fair. Kathy was also a biology teacher at Sidney Lanier High School, and during the summer, she worked at a telephone company. Kathy had great parents, brothers, friends, and so much more. She was also a phenomenal wife to Charlie and had zero idea what he was going to do. Margaret Elizabeth Hodges Whitman was 43 years old and the mother of Charlie, 2 other boys, and also a wife to Charles Whitman. Her and Charles ran a very successful plumbing business in Florida, and Margaret was a manager and also wrote a lot for the company. Margaret was a great woman with a whole lot to live for. Charlie's father, Charles, was apparently an awful man who would beat Margaret and the children and caused a lot of problems between the family. Now, an interesting thing here is that Charlie had a brother named John Michael, and about 7 years, almost to the date of Charlie's day of wrath on July 3rd of 1973, John Michael was at a bar called Big Daddy's Lounge, and there was 25-cent beer there, and a pretty popular band at the time called Phoenix was playing. There was a lot of people there, and so John Michael tried to leave, but the doors were locked. He then got into an argument with a security guard there, and John was shot in the abdomen and was killed. Now, the guy who killed him was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but barely served 5, which is ridiculous, but I found it a bit intriguing. Also, another interesting thing is that John was married to a woman named Gail, and they had a child who they named Kathleen. She was named after Charlie's wife. But when Kathleen was 22 years old, Gail took herself out with a gun. There was a lot of weird instances with guns involving this family and extended family, and it's just a bit bizarre. But not one of these innocent victims I mentioned deserved what happened to them. They were all just having a normal day and had absolutely zero idea that it would be their last. I can hope that after all of this time, they are all resting peacefully. But anyways, thank you for watching this episode of High Time Crime. If true crime is your thing, then please like and subscribe because it's all we do. I also have an all-exclusive Patreon if you're interested in that. There's a bunch of tiers to choose from, and the third one allows for you to see a Patreon-only video, and that tier and the second one allow you to have your name at the end of each High Time Crime video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, friend.